What's going on? It's your boy DameSmiff, and I am here as the number one Jane main on Dead by Daylight. Now, I essentially here have a little space in time, a little, cut, or I'll say area or real estate in this area where I can kind of discuss my opinions on various topics, whether it's, video games, technology, whatever the hell it is I'm thinking about, weird stuff and things like that, right? So I figured I'd take this time to do that. And one of the cool things that we've noticed is the very awesome background that we have here, which represents the new Walking Dead chapter for Dead by Daylight. So far, I'm loving it for the bare bones, what it is, the new characters, the new skins and things like that. I've noticed that there's a lot of content and pretty much opinions and statements and experiences of people who are dealing with a lot of bugs and glitches and things like that in this chapter. So far, I haven't had any of those experiences outside of the obvious one with the loading screen where there's a giant metal bar that comes from one of the highway beams in here. But all in all, I've had a pretty much good experience. The players seem to be pretty cool. I have noticed more players willing to actually complete games lately based on like the past, I'll say like 30 days of playing or so. Like there's way more people who are willing to actually finish a game. But there are situations where people are saying there's like perks that aren't working correctly, chases aren't starting, a whole bunch of different things, right? I think the issue that we're running into over and over is that we don't really have a consistent standard for our expectations with the game. And what I mean by that is that, for example, when we play, let's say, a first-person shooter game, something like bullet lag is a conversation that shouldn't be had on any kind of release date. Past the game coming out, we should never be talking about bullet lag as a problem for the developer. It should be an issue for internet or connectivity issues. But as far as it being like we coded the game improperly, that's not, that can't be a thing. But we only say that because that's our standard for first person shooters. So for example, if Rainbow Six Siege 2 came out and suddenly all the guns felt like they were like clunky and not accurate and things like that, that would be a very big red flag. The issue we're having with Dead by Daylight is we don't really have that standard, because when I was introduced to this game, I joined in the Twins chapter when the Twins came out. So by then the game had already looked very different from the way they imagined it in the beginning, which is not a bad thing. It's just that because of such a drastic change, or I'll say exponential change, we don't necessarily know what we're trying to be, what we're trying to make this whole thing. So now that I've had a good, I've probably been playing ever since then, right? I've had a good amount of time sitting with the game. I think the biggest step towards that standard would be figuring out how players prefer to play the game, right? And what I've noticed is that from either the survivors or killer side, fun is always the first and foremost factor, but the next very most forefront factor that people are playing this game for is to win. And so we will have to eventually define some kind of win state that everybody agrees with across the board. Now, the only reason that's such a layered issue or a layered conversation is because technically this game has 2 teams, but if you want to pretty much play semantics, there's 5 teams. There's 5 different players with the goal of winning. And the reason I say that is because the 4 survivors aren't technically on the same team, though they can cooperate. And this was something I had to kind of understand playing as Jane for a good while because most, if not all, of my matches, if you want to generalize, are solo queue. I go in alone. And when I go in alone, I notice that there is, kind of like in the real world, a kind of common sense way to play the game. You know, there's certain tropes and styles and strategies that we generally understand together, right? And that even goes down to how we cooperate. So I'll give you an example. If I see you're on a gen and I'm in a chase, it's common sense to try and lead that chase away from the generator so that way you can continue to work and make progress for our side, right? The only issue with that is that that's not bound by anything. That strategy is only there and in existence because I agree to it. It's not necessarily something I have to do. So on the other hand, there is a strategy called sandbagging where I could be in that exact same situation where you're on a gen and I'm in chase. But instead of running away from the generator you're working on, I bring the killer towards your generator, which could prompt the killer to say, this person actually progressing the other side towards their goal is more important to chase, thus saving my life. And you see how that standard blurs the line between what is a win for all three of these people in this example, all three of these players. So when we start talking about things like adding The Walking Dead, Five Nights at Freddy, and like whatever cool movie character you want to add in there, until we manage to fix that issue there, a lot of the strategies and playstyles and things like that that you like to use will be at the mercy of not knowing where they're going to stand for the next idea of a win state. And so I'll give you an example of what I mean. In short, if you're going to be playing a game like this and you and your friends are hopping on and you guys just want to have fun, one of the survivors here, they decide this person wants to just, do gens. They're chilling after work. They don't really got a lot of things on their mind. The next survivor, they really, really want to win, but they want everybody to win. So they're bringing perks and, they're thinking about ways to save everybody. The third person is here just to kind of like try out a new idea. They want to kind of have fun or maybe joke around with the killer, bring some funny perks and trickery and things like that. And then the last person here, let's say Jane. Jane decides she wants to play completely selfish solo queue. She doesn't really care what these three do as long as she makes it out of the exit gate. The killer, which is the fifth player in this equation, has an opportunity to use all three of these strategies or some kind of synergy of these four strategies, not three, of these strategies in order to win the game. The only issue is that these other players, unless they are communicating with each other, can't do the same thing. So if I'm Jane and I want to make it out alive and I don't really care about how it happens, it's gonna be putting me at a situation where this survivor here wants to save someone off the hook instead of doing a gen, because for them, or maybe it makes sense for them in their head, for them it makes sense to go and unhook a player instead of continuing to work on the gen, which could leave me with my strategy here as Jane in a situation that's not as ideal. So as the killer, I can use that to at least if I was the killer, and to my advantage. And so I've done it before where as the killer I would, let's say, slug a player on the ground. I know one survivor is doing a gen, a second survivor is looking to save the first one, and the fourth one is somewhere in between both of those tasks, either doing a generator or helping get this person off the ground. What then happens is they have to figure out which one of these tasks they're going to prioritize, or which one of these tasks they're going to mitigate from me interrupting. So if I decide to down somebody and then go kick a generator, are they going to stop me from doing that? Or if I down somebody, are they going to stop me from basically camping them or putting them on the hook? Which one takes more priority? Now, the answer to either one of those questions or those examples doesn't matter to the person who's in the solo queue situation, because there is an opportunity for all of those people to die and I would still make it out alive, thus making it a win state for this one particular player. So that is a common issue. We all have seen that conversation happen a bunch of times. I used pretty much a roundabout example, but it's one that I've kind of experienced, where pretty much each survivor's on their own agenda and you got to figure out how to win, and then everybody winds up dying in the end. So what does that look like as a win for the killer? Is it a win because you got most of the people? Is it a win because, you know, you maybe maxed out on points? What is it, right? And so I think what needs to happen when it comes to a lot of the issues we see with new chapter releases and buggy issues and things like that, we got to kind of release the idea of a win state for a certain demographic. And I say that to say this because whenever I play in solo queue, like I said, my experience with this particular chapter, I haven't had any bugs, or if I have had bugs, I didn't notice them. My experience has been great so far. And I think a part of it is that my expectations are pretty much in the floor. Like, I don't have high expectations for the chapter as far as, you know, new gameplay, some craziness going on. But that kind of leads me to my point as, what are we truly investing in when we play this game? So if I were to compare this game to anything else, I usually would play, let's say, like Halo Infinite. I usually play that for the skill. It's a first-person shooter. It's always fun to know that you can play a first-person shooter. But on the other hand, I also play it for the sake of having some kind of individual stat record or resume that I can look at. Like, it's cool to see my character customized, to see how many medals I've gotten, how many matches I've played and stuff like that, right? So that personalized data is attractive. And then on the other hand, there's also the big community of players, right? With this game, we don't necessarily have that data until recently, but it's not something that's readily available. Like, I can't pull it up here in the menu other than, yeah, right here, progress and things like that, right? So for most people, they don't necessarily play this game for that reason. So that already knocks out that demographic. And if you're into customization, it's limited in the sense of most of this stuff is unlocked, presets. It's not necessarily your creation, you know. And now you have to think about, all right, so if those people who really care about just having fun have a limited experience, and if the people who want to have a competitive win state or really competitive mindset when they play this, they have a limited experience, it starts to beg the question as to why are we starting to experience the bugs and things like that if there is no real standard for what we're expecting from the game. Because if a game was leading towards a more competitive type of feel, there would be pretty much a consistent or constant standard that you would see. But as we've seen in real time with this game, for it to have such drastic changes, if a game was focused on more so the fun, then you can see situations where there's kind of more of an ebbs and flow with the fun factor, because, you know, you're trying new things. But this is where I think Halo Infinite, or maybe games like this, would shine. The constant that would help with the whole fun factor experimentation side of things would be that we could see how things are affecting our records or our player or our stats and things like that. Now, the reason that's important is because when you get new chapters and new changes and things are completely different, and there's also new issues with everything being completely different, it feels uncomfortable and almost alienating. And to give you a realistic example, it'd be like moving into a new apartment and the people in your neighborhood don't speak the same language as you. You know, like generally everything's the same. Like you got a parking spot, you got air conditioning, windows, a refrigerator, microwave, and all that stuff. But your maintenance man speaks a completely different language. The front desk speaks a completely different language. All of the writing on the walls and the menus and your mail is in different languages. And so you have to now get outside of your comfort zone and learn a new thing. And depending how long and how big of a learning curve that is, it's going to dictate how uncomfortable you are until you get into it. That's key to understand with a game like this, because I went through that when I first joined, when the twins were out in the twins chapter. It was a strange learning curve to try to figure out why you would still receive an injury or a hit after a pallet drop and stun. It was a learning curve to figure out looping, like to understand like when and how to move, what to look for, and things like that, right? It was a learning curve to kind of figure out the perks, just generally what perks do and how to anticipate them and things like that, along with each new chapter bringing in a brand new way to play the game, right? So the reason, again, I bring this all in to say this is that I've had such a consistent level of, I'll say, satisfaction with the game because I literally sat with Jane. I only played with Jane. Jane was pretty much the one consistent thing in this entire experience that I was able to kind of like lock into, at least from a satisfaction or, you know, fun point, because I didn't have to think about all of the trials and tribulations it took to maybe do something like getting all my characters to level 100, or maybe trying to complete certain challenges for certain characters and things like that. I kind of mentally checked out of all that other stuff and was able to just focus on what I would call a win state, would be just escaping as Jane. So really two things happened. I was focusing solely on one character and the growth of one character. So that attachment, pretty much an attachment, kind of eased a lot of the stress of having to build up my catalog or collection of characters here, right? This would be like having a whole bunch of cars and needing to drive them, right? So I got a lot of value out of this one character because the bare bones way to play a survivor doesn't change for all the other characters. You can run, you can throw pallets and vault. You just need to change perks. But I can get all of these people's perks and do all of their things if I level them up to a certain point. So after that, I don't necessarily need to play them. But if I wanted to, it would kind of be annoying if I didn't unlock certain perks for one character, or it'd be annoying if, I don't know, maybe something was different about this character that I didn't like. So the attachment just grew, and I was able to consistently just kind of have an expectation for how I'm going to play. Now, as far as the chapters changing with Jane and all that stuff like that, I didn't have to really worry about that as much for the same reasons. Is because like when Nemesis on the Resident Evil chapter came out, I thought the idea of zombies and vaccines and stuff like that was going to be like the weirdest thing ever and just confusing. But it wasn't really, because it was just kind of like an addition to everything we already knew. The only issue we started to run into was like you know, the map being crazy big. We had to learn the map. And then, of course, there were a few glitches that came with that chapter. But all in all, being able to just stick with one character like that really made it easier. And I only noticed to be true because I felt the total opposite about the killer side. The killer side, I felt like I needed to kind of keep up, and similar to like having a bunch of cars, like have to turn the ignition on each one of the killers just to make sure I know how to play each one in each meta. But on the flip side, for Survivor, I didn't need to do that, or at least it didn't feel as strenuous. Part of it being that each Survivor plays exactly the same. So the second thing would be that, along with having to just play with this one character, I also was able to kind of stick with having to learn all the perks as this one Survivor, so I don't have to really think about having to deal with maybe synergizing with other characters and things like that, other players I mean. So for most of the perks on here, I don't necessarily need to use. There's no like content creation pressure or none of that stuff like that. There's really no stress to having to like go through and learn all these perks. So now when I think about like the issues that come with a lot of perks, I just have what I am comfortable with, my favorites, and that again comes with the consistency that I just chose to deal with. I just chose to play with one character, chose to play pretty much with probably like the same 2 or 3 ways I like to play. Like I don't really deviate when it comes to the perks and stuff like that. But all in all, I think that's pretty much helped the experience for me as far as getting over the fact that there's like weird things about this game. Like I was saying, getting hit by a pallet or hit while stunning with a pallet. Understanding vaulting and looping and how the game works, like the inner workings of the game. When you figure that out, it's easier to kind of manage all the glitches that come with it. That's usually why you'll see more experienced gamers in this particular game, Dead by Daylight. They don't quit, they just kind of complain a lot because it's just a different feeling, but the general bare bones of the game doesn't change. Now, why are we saying all this? We're pointing all of this out to simply kind of figure out, well, what would this game be like if we had an actual win state? And what would this game be like if we had pretty much a situation where people kind of had like a resume or stat system, right? What I think would occur is that you would kind of see people have a certain expectation for the game that's not only lower but realistic, right? If we knew how many players were actually escaping or how many escapes players were actually getting, a lot of the things that frustrate us wouldn't, because we knew the win state wasn't as easily acquired. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say if I'm playing a game and I know a killer is, let's say, camping, right? He's camping a hook, and I'm frustrated because I'm like, man, I want to win, and this killer just figured out a way to stop me from doing that. If I know this killer doesn't have a lot of wins, or if this, let's say, yeah, if I know this killer doesn't have a lot of like 4K wins or something like that, that can lead me to believe that there's something that I may be able to do to win here, right? The issue that usually happens with people is that the problem that's frustrating them, or whatever situation like this camping, is like right in front of them, right in front of their face. So they can't really see past the strategy of camping. So the win is not clear to them. It feels like the game is over because they were already started camping. Now, I'm not necessarily saying doing something like seeing the other players' stats and things like that, or maybe just putting them in ranks and things like that, will just be a telltale about who you can win against or not. But what it does is it kind of shows you, like, okay, I'm going up against somebody who knows what they're doing, or I'm going up against somebody who's trying something that both of us need to try to figure out, you know? And the only reason that's important here is because this is a video game. It's a video game. Like, if this was like, you know, high stake poker, I guess you could hide stats, but It's not that serious. So I think what people are taking serious is more of an emotional, very like surface level issue that can be alleviated by simply just having I know where my stats are, or I'm going to play the way I know to play to win, and they'll just kind of rest in that. And all the other issues that come with a normal video game, like glitches and bugs and stuff like that, wouldn't even matter. But if we don't do that, then it seems like a lot of people, they're going to try to like impose what they personally believe should be a standard for the game. The standard for the game should be kind of set by the developers, and if the developers don't do that, then we'll be simply just kind of doing anything and calling that a win. You'll see people looping killers for 10 minutes and then dying and then saying that was a great match because they had fun. It's not necessarily a perfect match, but it was probably a great match. You see killers, trying a new perk system or a perk strategy and getting the full value and still losing all 4 survivors out the exit gate and having a lot of fun. So we don't necessarily know what a win is other than the experience. And if the experience is bad from a glitch, from a strategy that worked from the other team, then that would be the win state. And you want to get in control of that if you're a developer of a game, or if you're a community that wants to keep a game alive, because that's kind of what shapes the idea of what the fun is. Like, if I played baseball and I only got points for every time I hit the ball, not necessarily every time I reached home base, it kind of changes what I'm doing and how I'm gonna do it, So it's just something to think about. But let me know, what do you think in the comments? Is this something weird as far as like the phenomenon of every update there's a bug or a glitch going on? And what do you call a win state when something weird like this happens? Like if the game starts acting weird and strange and glitching out and killer chases don't start and your perks don't work, at the end of the match, how do you know you won? So let me know in the comments.